When you ask people what the best game of all time is, you're likely going to receive a variety of different answers. But ask people what the best year in gaming history is, and nobody seems to have an answer, which I find incredibly strange, because in my opinion, the answer's incredibly obvious. It's 2007. 2007 saw the release of so many critically acclaimed game releases that it's hard to even count them all. But it's not just about how good the games that released that year were, it's also how influential all of these games were. And there's one game that exemplifies this better than any other, and I bet you've heard of it. The hype for Halo 3 was something that was almost unheard of at the time. People were going so crazy over Halo 3 that it had reached mainstream media. And this shouldn't really be a surprise in hindsight, since Microsoft had spent over $40 million on the marketing budget for the game. And this marketing budget was so large mostly because they wanted to sell more Xbox 360s. But they were really pushing this game as hard as they could. They made a gorgeous CGI rendered trailer that they played at the Super Bowl, and a Super Bowl ad in 2007 costs over $2 million. And that's just for the ad slot alone. They had Master Chief on Mountain Dew bottles and specialized 7-Eleven cups. They even made a super elaborate set of live-action trailers in the universe of Halo, where they were at a fake museum that depicted the Covenant War. They showed old war veterans talking about what it was like to fight alongside Master Chief, and they had models of the guns from Halo placed around as exhibits in the museum. And the series of trailers ended with the now famous Believe trailer that panned through a diorama of a battle with the Covenant, with Master Chief in the center of it all, holding a single grenade. The marketing push for Halo 3 was huge, and fortunately for Microsoft, this marketing push really paid off. Halo 3's success was unbelievable. At midnight on launch day, there were people all over the world queuing outside of their local game store, waiting to buy the game the moment it dropped. And Halo 3 wasn't just big. It was breaking all the records. Halo 3's release was the single biggest entertainment debut in history at the time. Not just the biggest video game debut, the biggest entertainment debut. It earned $170 million in the first day, which at the time was bigger than any movie or album that had ever released before. Now, compared to today, a $170 million debut doesn't even scratch the top 50 anymore. But at the time, this sort of thing was completely unprecedented. Halo hadn't just succeeded, it had blown all expectations out of the water. And the craziest part of all was that the game actually lived up to the hype. Halo 3 was by far the biggest game that released this year, but it wasn't alone in its astronomical success, because another game was released in 2007, and it was about to change the landscape of video games for the next few decades in a very major way. Call of Duty is a franchise that by today's standards is pretty formulaic. They release a new game every year, and it's usually very similar to the game that came before it. A similar game with slightly better graphics and a new campaign. And regardless of your opinion on the formula, it's incredibly popular. But this formula didn't just spawn in from nowhere. It had to get started somewhere. And it got started, you guessed it, in 2007, with the release of the critically acclaimed Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Call of Duty before this point was known for depicting a semi-realistic World War II setting, and it was pretty popular, but it was no Halo. It wasn't nearly as successful as the Call of Duty series we know and love today. But Modern Warfare changed this. This was the first game in the series that was depicting a modern warfare setting, instead of throwing us back into the Second World War. And at the time, depicting a modern warfare setting like this was actually a relatively novel idea. Most first-person shooters at the time were either space-age sci-fi, or they were historical World War shooters. Now, a modern setting like this wasn't a brand new idea or anything. Battlefield Modern Combat had released in 2005 to a much smaller fanfare. But the modern setting for a first-person shooter was far from commonplace. But Modern Warfare was about to change all that, because this game was incredibly popular, selling almost as well as Halo 3 did. People loved this new take on the Call of Duty franchise, and because of this game's insane popularity, it would start a tidal wave of brand new military shooters releasing over the next decade. Modern military shooters went from a niche idea to mainstream success, and it exploded franchises like Battlefield and Rainbow Six into the limelight. And this game was also the beginning of the Call of Duty franchise's billion-dollar-a-year success story, with them releasing a new game every year that is parroting the exact same formula that they created in 2007. Now, 2 industry-defying giants releasing in just 1 year is pretty wild, but 2007 isn't done releasing bangers. Many of the most popular gaming franchises in history were all born in 2007. The Witcher, Mass Effect, BioShock, Assassin's Creed, and Uncharted all had their first game in the series release in the beautiful year of 2007. Uncharted is an especially interesting one to me because Uncharted really kickstarted this trend of what you might call cinematic games that are all the rage in the modern day. Things like The Last of Us, and the Horizon series, and the God of War reboot. These games all take a lot of inspiration from the first Uncharted, and the Uncharted series as a whole. But even after all these games release, banger after banger, suddenly Valve comes along, and they say, why drop 1 banger game in a year when we can drop 3? The Orange Box might just be the best deal in video game history. It featured 5 games: Half-Life 2, Episode 1 and 2, Portal, and Team Fortress 2. These 2 games had released in the 3 years prior, but these 3 games all released in 2007, with their first appearance being in the Orange Box. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 doesn't break any new ground, but it is a traditional sequel to Half-Life 2, and Half-Life 2 is one of the best games of all time. So more Half-Life 2 stuff is always a banger, so this game is incredibly good. But then you've got Portal, a super innovative concept for a puzzle game, and a game that was also incredibly technologically impressive for the time. The idea that you could join 2 spaces in the game world seamlessly and then like walk between them was a crazy concept. And even better still, you could see yourself through the portals in real time. And if you had your portals lined up in a row, you could see through them infinitely. The game realistically simulated how light would travel through these portals, and how the player would be able to walk from one location to another in an instant. And they achieved all of this in 2007. This was groundbreaking for the time. And then there's Team Fortress 2. Now, I might be a tiny bit biased towards Team Fortress 2. You know, maybe just a little bit. But this game, even objectively speaking, was a really big deal. Team Fortress had already invented the class-based shooter genre in the 90s, but Team Fortress 2 made this genre explode in popularity. And the success of this genre would give birth to many a game trying to capture that same lightning in a bottle that TF2 had created all the way back in 2007. So Valve dropped not 1, not 2, but 3 absolute bombshells on the gaming industry in 2007. But not only that, they also sold them together as a bundle with Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 bundled in. And you know how much the Orange Box cost on release? $50. $50 for 5 entire banger video games all rolled into one. Now, the list of games that came out in 2007 is very long, and a ton of them are bangers, even the ones that aren't super famous. Guitar Hero 3 is a personal favorite of mine. I played this game a ton when I was a kid, and it also had a massive influence on my taste in music too. But there's also God of War 2, Phantom Hourglass, Super Mario Galaxy. There was a B-movie game from 2007? Holy shit! There was also a game called Crysis. This game was known at the time for really pushing what was possible in terms of graphical fidelity at the time. So much so that this game was practically impossible to run at max graphics settings on any PC from the time. This was such a well-known thing at the time that if you bought a brand new expensive PC, people would be like, well, yeah, that's great. But can it play Crysis? But even outside of video game releases, there was something else that released in 2007 that would have a major impact on the gaming industry. It was a website called Justin TV. Justin TV was a site designed for live streaming. It was initially intended for like real life live streams, but live streaming video games became incredibly popular on the platform. And in 2011, Justin TV would get rebranded into Twitch.tv, the current biggest streaming site in the world, home to many of the most well-known content creators on the planet. So this is why I truly believe that 2007 is the single best year for video games that we've ever seen. Many of the most famous and influential games released in 2007, and many of these games would influence the games industry for the next 17 years. You know, I've never bought into all that nostalgia bait people say about how games nowadays aren't as good as they used to be, but reading the list of games that came out in 2007 really does make it a little bit more believable, doesn't it? Thanks for watching.